Heavily inspired by 1990s crime thrillers and heist movies, crime boss Rockay City wants to throw you into your very own movie as an up-and-coming criminal, looking to make himself the titular crime boss. You'll achieve this by jumping into various heists and crime activities with friends to take the city for all it's worth. If you were expecting an open-world crime-based first-person shooter, then you're going to be disappointed, because Crime Boss chooses, instead, to focus on bite-sized cooperative-based experiences, designed around short segments of frantic fun. Think of something along the lines of Payday, but with smaller and less intricate levels. Crime Boss has 4 play modes. There's Baker's Battle, Crime Time, Urban Legends, and a quick tutorial heist, Street Smarts. Baker's Battle is the single-player campaign mode, which throws you into the shoes of Baker, who's come to Rockay City to take it all. Crime Time is your quick play mode, which you can play through with AI, friends, or randoms, while Urban Legends throws you into a series of mini-campaigns, also playable online or with the AI. Baker's Battle is built around the game's copious marketing of its 90s star-studded cast. Danny Glover, Michael Madsen, Kim Basinger, and a handful of once to slightly famous faces are here, including the Iceman himself, Vanilla Ice. Oh, and Chuck Norris rocks up, to do what I assume was meant to be a spoof of his Walker Texas Ranger character. It certainly helps that Crime Boss Rockay City's environments are quite pretty to look at. There are detailed character models, and the atmosphere feels appropriate for the 90s vibe. You've got performance and visual fidelity modes, and while the game looks great in the visual fidelity mode, the frame rate drops were notable when there was too much going on screen, or when too many NPCs were milling around. Performance mode ditches some of the shinier visual detail, but still looks great and runs much better. Now Baker's Battle has you taking over Rockay City one area at a time, until you become the city's kingpin. You'll do this by hiring soldiers and lieutenants to create a formidable crew, buying new weapons, then robbing banks, strip malls, armored trucks, and even other gangs. All the tools and levels you'll see in other modes are here for you to play around in. Initially, this may seem like a good way to get to grips with the mechanics, but Crime Boss Rockay City throws a spanner into their thinking with one large campaign twist. It's functionally a roguelike. While you can hire goons and run through the levels as them, you can also play as Baker himself. Each time Baker dies, though, the campaign resets and you have to start all over again. Well, almost. Each level up unlocks permanent perks, from new weapons to more health, and I did find that, even after death, I started my run off with a significant amount in the bank, and a few objectives already completed. Cutscenes and their dialogue also change during subsequent runs, which makes death less of a pain and the briefings less repetitive. As a result, I'd argue playing quick matches is probably the best way to come to terms with the simple mechanics, and will actually make your campaign run easier. Now naturally, those roguelike elements extend to your crew. You've got plenty of nameless soldiers you don't have to worry about, but those that go on runs with you can be killed permanently. The game initially provides you with some free operators, but the ones you really want are going to cost you some decent cash. So in between keeping on top of your expenditure, you still have to make sure your guns come back safely as well. You'll also want to hire more than just 3 of your favourite crew members, as after a mission, they'll need to rest and won't be available until the next game day. Now you could take on missions solo if you like, but it's not really recommended as once the shooting starts, it can get hectic, and you can die quite easily with no one around to revive you before you bleed out. Now, Urban Legends takes that campaign design and breaks it up into a series of mini-campaigns with specific objectives, heists, and turf wars to complete. There's a whole new set of dialogue and cutscenes to sit through, so you're not just retreading old ground. This time around, you won't get to play as Baker, but rather one of his many hired goons looking to prove himself to the boss man. All the loot you earn is used to buy equipment for the next mission, so there are some light progression elements beyond the narrative. In all likelihood, you'll be spending most of your time online in Crime Time. As with the other modes, the basic gameplay loop is the same. You can roll around with friends, randoms, or the AI, and thankfully the game's simplistic design allows even randoms to coordinate and get on with objectives quickly. For those interested, the AI is fairly decent, and I never got too frustrated with them during my playtime, which is a big plus. I probably had just as many moments of watching them getting the job done with finesse as I did having them stand around pointlessly, even after I chucked a loot bag to them and told them to follow me. Now, I mentioned the content is mostly the same across all modes, as Crime Boss Rockay City uses procedural generation for its map layouts and mission objectives to add some variety across matches, but it wasn't long before I started seeing the same strip mall layouts and guard positions across all 3 game modes. Luckily for anyone jumping into the game now, the developers have recently dropped the big 2.0 patch, which introduces new weapons and environments into the mix. As for what's on offer, there's a decent amount of variety in mission types, such as robbing strip malls, armoured cars, and engaging in turf wars. They can range from a simple shootout under an overpass to a running gunfight across a freeway and into a hotel. Many objectives are introduced as you play, ranging from finding keycards to just grabbing all the loot you can and getting away in one piece. For those that want it, stealth is simple and effective for moments that require it, but it really does feel like the developers want you to experience the cinematic thrills of a running gunfight from escalating police forces, just like that iconic sequence in Michael Mann's Heat. A fair amount of the time, this is how most of my missions ended up, and I'd be remiss if I failed to point out how tense and exciting these situations could get. Given its rocky launch on PC and digitally on consoles earlier this year, my biggest surprise was that it's actually quite a bit of fun if you go in with reasonable expectations. Sure, the mechanics and AI could be improved, but the game's bite-sized approach to missions, coupled with the satisfying shooting mechanics, had me enjoying most of the missions I was thrown into. Robbing a bank and holding off a slowly escalating wave of SWAT officers while my crew was looting the safe was both tense and exhilarating, as was a daylight armoured car heist where I had to hold off converging cops while I waited for an automatic saw to slice through the doors. There are some downsides to the procedural generation, of course, especially when the solo campaign uses the same tools. That variety on offer is still limited, and it won't be long before you've seen all the permutations on offer, even during a single campaign run. Infinite variability through procedural generation is still yet to happen. This plays into one of the main issues with the solo campaign, and that's, while it's entertaining in its own right, with some unique sequences you won't find in other game modes, it still suffers when it comes to side stories played out in the background. Running across familiar beach or warehouse levels, shooting up more rival gang members, feels like missed potential when there's an elaborate side story going on about Russian scientists that you only get to hear about. It feels like the perfect content for more scripted, handcrafted levels, but the procedural generation design template, along with the focus entirely on Rockay City and its rival gangs, leaves these moments feeling flat. And now onto what could be crime boss Rockay City's major flaw. Well, if you're expecting that star-studded power to lend some extra oomph to the game, you're definitely going to have to check your expectations at the curb. Sadly, the writing is mostly horrendous, and the voice acting aims to match it. There are a couple of performers that do the best with what they have, but for the most part, it's universally bad. Even Chuck Norris plays as straight as can be, despite all the absurd dialogue, and he delivers his lines like he's slowly reading a restaurant menu without his glasses. Now wrapping up, Crime Boss Rockay City was a title that surprised me. It wasn't the open-world affair I was hoping for, and the procedural generation doesn't vary things enough. But the game was more fun than I went in expecting it to be. That said, it's best played with friends for quick matches of explosive action, if that's how you want things to go. And it might be a solid choice for a late-night drunken party game. Whether or not you'll return to it after you've completed the campaign and seen all the variation that the procedural generation has to offer is another story. If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow.